if you imagine the conservation area to be a square, right? And there's two marbles in there. One is a poaching marble and the other is a ranger marble. And they sort of travel around this huge square. The chance of them actually meeting as in enough proximity with, visibility of about 50 meters that you can actually, make contact with them is super, super low.
This is Beer 30, a podcast that connects badass people and shares their experiences over a cold one. Kick back, relax, and enjoy the show. And if you like it, don't forget to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Let's get started with today's episode.
Welcome to another episode of Beer 30, brought to you by UF Pro. I'm your host, Tanner Denton, and today we are joined by Boris Vos, a former Dutch Marine turned conservation connoisseur. Sorry about that, Boris. How's it going, man? Thank you for coming on to the show.
Thanks for having me, Tanner.
Yeah, you are in the, I don't know if they call it the outback of Kenya, but it definitely looks like an outback or a bush of Kenya, and it looks awesome.
Yeah, it's generally referred to as the bush. So that's what it is.
Yep. Okay.
Consists mainly of bush.
Yeah.
And that's where we are. We're in the middle of Tsavo, which is a massive area on the eastern side of Kenya. I think the whole ecosystem is about the size of the Netherlands.
Wow.
And it's all bush, and we're right smack in the middle of it.
Wow. That's awesome. Well, just so we can sort of give the audience a little background, if for some reason they have no idea of who you are or what you do, I do have some notes here that you were in the Dutch Ministry of Defense for about 22 years. So if there's any way you could boil 22 years into a few minutes, how would you do that?
I'll try to make an effort. I mean, I went to the Marine Corps because it felt like a really good place to sort of work, but also to belong to. I was very young when I joined. Well, very young. I was 19 years old.
Okay.
And that was sort of my main motivation at the time. Very quickly, I figured out that the water is not really my main interest, which is a bit weird if you choose the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
I was always the happiest guy if I, could put my feet on the ground on the beach. And I think that theme has sort of gone through my entire career. I had some operational deployments, the usual Iraq, Afghanistan, before that Bosnia, counter-piracy here off the coast. And in between, I had a lot of training jobs, and all of those training things all sort of gravitated around being on soil. So I've done I went down recce training, sniper training, jungle warfare training, tracking. These are all land-based stuff. So I was relying on the boats and the Navy to get me there and the team, and then we could do our thing on land. That really sort of summarizes it all. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, you're definitely a land, feet on the ground type of guy instead of feet in the water. That is very interesting that you decided to go to the Marines for that. You talked about doing a lot of training. I mean, sniper training, tracking training, stuff like that. How did all of that lead you into conservation? And you founded the Ranger Campus and the Lead Conservation. Yeah. How do those two go together?
Well, basically, the moment that I realized that I wanted to do something in conservation, I always make the same mistake as you do. I do it all the time. I say like conversation instead of conservation, but I got it right this time. So this was while we were doing counter-piracy off the coast here, and we had a couple of days time with the team to go into Tsavo and sort of have a good rummage around. And if you've never been there, it's absolutely a place that you need to go. It's one of those few places in the world where you can get groups of hundreds of elephants still roaming freely.
Wow.
Which is incredible. Some of them are big tuskers, and those are those massive elephants with tusks that reach the ground. And first time in Kenya, first time on safari, really, it was just mind-blowing to see that. And then it wasn't very long after that we came across a group of rangers that were standing around an elephant that was actually just shot. One of the tusks was removed, and they thought it was, as they call them, shifters, so bandits. and those particular ones were coming from Somalia. It's a very porous border, so they were coming in, and they were just about ready to start their follow-up. And that sort of juxtaposition between seeing those elephants roam in their sort of natural habitat undisturbed, and then that scene for a couple of bucks just got to me. Not like in a very emotional sense of way, but it was a shift of mission almost, if you can imagine that. And so in my head, unconsciously, that mission had shifted. I spent another 2 years in the Marine Corps, and then ultimately handed in my resignation and said, okay, this is what I'm going to go do. I had some savings. I went along with a couple of other organizations as a volunteer to start understanding the problem. I'd seen one dead elephant. I had no idea what poaching and everything is about. And coming from that instructor background that we just briefly touched on, it's sort of, I gravitated naturally towards that as one of the solutions for improving or how, protecting these animals. And so we started thinking about, okay, we need to, instead of training rangers, let's train rangers to be instructors, right? And I've been training instructors my entire professional life. And so that was something really close to heart. And that's how we got started with Ranger Campus, which was 2016, I think.
Okay.
Together with my wife, now my wife, then she was my girlfriend. And yeah, it's been a train ever since, really. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. No, I don't know how I would respond if I came across a just giant elephant that had just been shot and taken for what people want from it. That would actually, I can't imagine the things going through your mind and how that made you turn a new leaf, I guess is how you'd say it, but really want to get into that. Your current role is you're an interim security manager at Wildlife Works. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
So are you specifically strictly just training people, or are you doing a lot other things in the conservation realm that aren't just tracking and training people to get poachers and stuff?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the interim job. So Wildlife Works is actually the land that we're on at the moment. It's about 500,000 acres. It is a conservation area that sits right smack between Savo East and Savo West. And it's been our home as lead, at first as Ranger Campus, now as lead conservation. It's been our home since we landed in Kenya. But it's also a conservation operation. So there's about 150 rangers. We've got an air wing. We have, multiple vehicles to go in. We have an information team or intel team. We have a training team. So it's quite a sort of a big setup. And at some point I was asked the question, could you help us to reorganize our ranger force and also put sort of, policy, procedures, SOPs in place, these sort of kind of things. So I sort of, being a good neighbor, I took that on. I do that 2 days a week. I've got an amazing team. I've got a great head ranger, and there's some awesome people in the team. So it's not I don't have to be on top of it like all the time, but it's more providing the structure and guidance and mentoring and these sort of kind of things. And it does take me into the field every once so often. I'm not on every patrol, obviously, but certain types of operations or certain things, I will go out as well and join the teams.
Okay. Do you enjoy, I guess, which do you enjoy more, being out in the field, or I guess closer to civilization and actually teaching people right where you are?
Well, we get both, actually. Some of the training that we do, especially, I've got a couple of really good trainers on the team, all former Rangers, all Africans. They do a lot of the training in country with different partners all over Africa.
Okay.
They've also been to Indonesia not too long ago, so they're traveling well. I'm sort of more concentrating now on instructor development, leadership, but also indeed just, building that framework. So part of my job can still be teaching something under a tree somewhere, which I enjoy thoroughly. We also have a training camp here, which is rustic but sufficient and a very nice place to stay.
Okay.
That's where we do a lot of training as well. So I go there, and then some of the stuff I do more sort of around civilization, if you will.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you were to be out in the field and teaching rangers, are you teaching them more on the tracking side, or are you teaching them sort of, everything that you can touch on? Because I know you are, absolutely an expert in tracking.
Hmm. Well, I've got a caveat for that one, because I thought I was an expert in tracking until I went to Africa and met some of the indigenous guys all over that are just ridiculous. And this is not humble bragging. It is a fact. These are guys that sort of grow up, and as soon as they're around the age of 5, they get a bunch of goats. They get sent out in the bush for them to graze. They learn how to track. They learn how to follow the prints of an individual goat that has veered off from the flock line, or whatever that thing is called when you have a lot of goats.
Yeah.
And so when I talk about tracking with African rangers, I generally don't talk necessarily about the technique of tracking, the ability to see sign, the ability to interpret sign, the ability to follow it. But I talk more about how can you do that in an organized manner with a team so that you have security in place while you're tracking. How can you use multiple teams to actually, cut that time distance gap? There is a bit about data collection that the guys need to do while they're tracking, and also evidence collection, because that person, when arrested, needs to go in front of a court of law. So it's generally not necessarily about the tracking itself. And I notice now that with the training, I've gone away a little bit from sort of individual level skills to more like team skills. How can you integrate this now into, a team that runs really well, is led well, is good at risk assessment, dynamic risk assessments as they're going along. All the good stuff that you want to see. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure you have, but have you heard of the TV show Lost? It was a huge TV show back in early 2000s, had Terry O'Quinn, Matthew Fox. They were stranded on an island and from a plane crash. Have you heard of that TV show?
Sounds hectic. No, I've heard of it. I've never seen it.
Okay. I highly recommend it, because there are, I love the show, but there are some moments in there where some people have tracking skills. And they follow footprints or whatever people leave behind, because it's very hard to go through bush and not leave a trail. And so they're looking at broken twigs, whatever it may be. But they mostly focus on footprints. There always seems to, they look at the ground and like, hey, a footprint right there. He's going straight north or whatever. Is tracking that simple, or is it more than just following footprints?
Yeah, there's a little bit more to it. Like, footprints is something that we call ground sign. So that's stuff you see on the ground all the way up to sort of saw ankle level. And then you have, some people call it aerial sign or top sign in the British military, as they call it. And that's anything from the ankles up that you leave behind every time you scrub past a tree, or you push vegetation aside. So a beginner tracker will often very much focus on what's on the ground in front of them, because very often a footprint or a partial is a very, very nice confirmation that you are actually still following a human being with sort of footwear or bare feet, whatever. So it's a nice thing to go to, but an experienced tracker will incorporate also the top sign, the aerial sign, because there might be times when the quarry, as we call it, the person that we're following, the quarry, for instance, steps on a surface that doesn't leave a lot of sign. There might be a little bit of color change. The color might have changed by the pressure of the foot passing. So suddenly you cannot 100% confirm that is a human print. It's just a sort of uninterrupted string of little bits of evidence. And then if you don't confirm that with top sign or with aerial sign, then what might happen is you actually pick up a crossing track of an animal that leaves a similar type of sign, just that little color change, and you might veer off. Whereas the height of the person will give you an idea, what is actually moving through the bush, if that makes sense. So that, yeah. And that's the visual bit of it. But I do find that, smell and hearing, it's not so much for me, but smell and hearing is also super important. And it's also one of the things that sort of draws people into tracking. It's a very mindful, very sort of inquisitive, receptive sort of type of state that you're in. And I had a chat yesterday with someone about it. It was, if the track, if there's any trackers listening, they will recognize this. If you start a track where there's something at stake, doesn't matter what it is, you will feel that pressure. And that pressure will partially come from people looking over your shoulder and saying, okay, come on, let's go. But it's also, most of it is a pressure that you put onto yourself. And so what you see experienced trackers do is they forget about all that. What is at stake is not important. An indigenous tracker once summarized it to me like, I asked him, what do you look for when you track, And I was obviously looking for like little details and things I could learn. And he said, so I look at the ground, I see a track. I look a bit further, I see another one. The end. That was it. That was how he tracked. And I thought about it for a while, but it makes perfect sense because you have to be in that sort of, you don't want to be dealing with what is going to come. You're thinking about staying on that particular track. It's very mindful. People generally enjoy it, and the senses do open up when you go like that. So your hearing gets better, you smell more acutely, these kind of things.
Okay, wow. Yeah, I absolutely would not be able to just think what you said, just I see a track and I look for another. I would absolutely think way too much into it, and that's absolutely what separates you from me. One of the many things. So that's probably a common misconception is that I have to look for every single minute detail and everything. I'm assuming that's not what tracking is. I mean, tracking is, you're looking for the one piece of evidence and you're looking for the next. I mean, is that a good way of saying it?
No, I think you're absolutely right, and it really depends why are you tracking, right? If you're tracking to catch up with someone, your tracking becomes a little bit different because you can imagine. And I don't have time to look for every bit of track. So generally, when I get on track for something like that, I will start slowly for a couple of minutes to sort of start seeing what that track picture is. What are all the little elements that make up this particular track? And then once I have that, I'm going to start speeding up. I'm going to start skipping some evidence, not too much, but I'm trying to continuously link it, but I'm going to start speeding up. And if I can't find this one, but I can see the next one, I'll go to the next one. You start a little bit more sort of almost predictive also at some point. You follow that person for a while, you know how they navigate certain obstacles. You might find out how they actually navigate. Are they going off terrain features? Are they going off a compass course? Are they using a GPS? Because you can see that sort of in the pattern, how people go through the bush. Are they experienced? Are they not? All these good things. But all with the aim of speeding up more, understanding my quarry better and better as I go along, and then catching up with them. Whereas if I were to do it from a forensic standpoint, almost, so let's say I need to link a particular crime scene, let's say, and this is just hypothetical, let's say there is a rhino being poached, the carcass is here. We're able to establish the tracks of the people that were involved. Now we follow those tracks. Maybe they're already a little bit older, for argument's sake. Maybe it's 48 hours, something like that. Then we follow it slowly, hopefully getting to the point where we can link it to a community or a house or maybe even an individual, and then it will become part of a investigation. And then, you need to have your stuff together, if you will. So you need to prove the entire track, basically. And I think those are the two differences. Yeah, I like the fast bit much more than the slow bit, than the slow stuff.
Okay. Whenever you are, doing these fast and slow bits, how much of it is down to instinct and how much of it is down to your training?
It's a great question. And we first have to agree on what instinct means, right? Because I think, back when we were serving, we sometimes talked about this sixth sense thing. And any soldier listening will recognize this, and a lot of civilians as well, is that you suddenly get that feeling that something's wrong. Someone's watching you. There might be some movement somewhere over there. And you get that feeling, and then seconds later you confirm it through direct observation, hearing or whatever. And our understanding of it always was that it's sort of, and maybe there's a neurologist out there somewhere that's going to disprove me, but people are very good at sort of pattern recognition. Tracking is also a lot of pattern recognition. So, and what can happen is that you pick up subconsciously a signal through one of your five senses that your brain can slot into a pattern it's seen before, and it tells you, hey, watch out now, or, something there, or something like that.
Yeah.
So if that sort of leads into instinct, if that is somewhat a comparable concept, then I would say that there is quite a bit of that when you're tracking. But you have to, at all times, be 100% sure that what you are following is legit.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit different for everyone. Some people need more evidence to know for sure they're still on the track. Other people, as they get experienced and more experienced, they just need a little bit to be really accurate. Maybe, I don't know, is that instinct? I don't know.
I think it's it's very hard to find the difference between the two in that case, because at my background, I shoot a lot. And in shooting, whenever you are, for example, whenever you're bringing a red dot up on target, most of the time, whenever a very new shooter is shooting through a red dot for their first time, they want to see a very crisp single stationary dot before they fire. But whenever you get more experience and you train a lot more, whether that is training it through your brain that you don't need a very steady sight picture to be able to fire. As soon as you see a dot come up on that target, whatever it is, you're able to fire because through your training that, hey, I can make that shot, or through your instinct, that's all I need. That's all I need. As soon as I see that, my brain sees red, green, whatever it may be, and I'm able to fire. So, I think it's very hard to distinguish the two between it. That's instinct or training.
If you explain it like, sorry, there was a little bit of a delay. Sorry, I don't want to talk over you, Dana, but
no, you're good.
I think if you explain instinct like that, then that is almost like the end station of your training and your practice, right? So everything you do building up in your example, the weapon handling itself, the controls, knowing where everything is exactly, the muscle memory of placing that stock every time in the same spot and getting like a good position through that repetition at some point becomes subconscious. So then you just do it because your body recognizes it where it needs to go to do that shot. And I think that's when you then you enter the realm of that instinct where you're doing all these things, but including the assessment, including, is it a threat? Is it not a threat? Some of these tier 1 units are absolute experts at that, or SWAT police units. Then you get to the instinctive. Then you don't have to think about it. It all happens very quickly in one sequence, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think that sometimes with enough training, the training turns into instinct?
I think so. Yeah.
It seems like it.
Yeah. When we chatted about this podcast, you said, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions you don't know an answer to. Well, there you go. I think there's always an element of that. Like if someone builds a table, it's still a very conscious process, but some of the things like sawing or hammering will become like instinctive for the very experienced craftsman. So there's always that element. Yeah.
Well, I think when it comes to instinct and training, I'm sure that whenever you are tracking during the day, it is there's much more instinct or training during the day rather than at night, I would assume. Because I am clueless. So whenever you're tracking at night, how does that change everything? Because more than likely you have less night time to train for it to become instinct. So is there a lot more that goes into tracking at nighttime? Obviously, you can use various pieces of equipment to like night vision or thermal, whatever it may be. But in terms of just the raw training and instinct of nighttime tracking, does anything change there?
Everything changes. If you talk about sort of the conservation context, wildlife activity during the night to start with is completely different than during the day. So where a lion will sleep 20 hours per 24 under a tree somewhere, those 4 hours that the lion is active is at night. So that's when they hunt. So and also, like, for instance, elephants, they are ridiculously quiet. You can be 4 meters away from them. If they're behind a bush and they're standing still and they notice that you're coming near, they will stop all their movements, all their sounds. You can be 4 meters away and you wouldn't know it. This is an example. I haven't been within 4 meters of an actual elephant.
Oh, wow.
Thank weather. And so that changes. The risk goes up, like, significantly at night.
Okay.
And it's not a risk you fix with a gun. It's a risk that you need to deal with through, training. And to give you a really good example, some of the poachers operating in this particular area exclusively work at night. And they go out at night with just a panga in their hand, so like a machete.
Yeah.
And they go out and hunt, and they walk through the bush with the lions, with the elephants, with the buffaloes, with everything that goes around. So it is a skill that you can develop, and it is a skill that you can get very good at. But it takes so much more time than training for daylight operations. And then there's the aspect of the tracking itself. It's a highly visual skill. So if you have to follow a track at night, the best possible option is to have a canine, because that canine can also help you as early detection for wildlife around you. So it's an added layer of help with that risk. But if you don't have a dog, it becomes quite difficult. Some nights, when you have a full moon, I think it's around this time at the moment, you might have enough light to actually see the tracks. Or you can use light manipulation, where you use a light at a certain angle, and there's a bit of a procedure to it how you can do that with a team, so that you are still able to see some of those footwear impressions. But already a lot of the color change that you have during the day, you're gonna lose completely. So yeah, it's a different kettle of fish, really. And it's something like, if you don't have a canine, you need a way to risk against the benefit of that particular follow-up. Or wait till the morning. That's the other option.
Yeah. When it comes to using a canine, is that usually in the, I guess, tactical military side, or is that also used in the conservation side? And if it's used in both, is there a big transition between the two of tactical military tracking and conservation tracking?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, we worked with, when I went to that jungle warfare instructors course in Brunei, they also had dogs attached to that course. So you had tracker dogs and you had so-called patrol dogs. Patrol dog goes with you on patrol and might sit with you in an ambush. And when that dog notices that the opposing force is starting to walk into the area, it will indicate by sitting up and turning his head towards where the noise is coming from or the smell is coming from. And the tracker dogs are literally that, tracker dogs on a leash. The thing with military operations is it's generally very high risk. So the people you're up against are generally, they either have some military training or they have a lot of experience. If they want to come and have a confrontation with you, they're geared up for that. So the threat level is really high. Whereas in conservation, that is not always the case. So like in a series that we just did, that's a realistic scenario where you get a group of maybe 3 or 4 guys, 3 most of the time, or 2. One of them has the gun. He's the specialist. He gets hired to be the gun. It can be a very old rifle. It can even be a home-built rifle where he shoots batteries with black powder. And then you have one guy who is potentially the tracker, and he carries some equipment. And the third guy generally, for here, for instance, he brings some sugar, some milk, some stuff for on the way. And then as soon as they make their kill, they throw all of that stuff out, put whatever they got in, and make their way out. So this gives us an opportunity. Sorry for elaborating a little bit, but it gives us an opportunity because in conservation, we can be faster. We can take a little bit more risk, considering that you have dogs and you also have a response team around that dog. And sometimes you even have an air asset available. So you have a lot of good stuff. And it, of course, changes. If you go to a conservation area that is in an active insurgency, South Sudan or bordering South Sudan, the DRC, some of these places, northern Mozambique, there's an insurgency going on. the threat there is completely different. So then you would go back to a more careful approach with tracking with dogs. But in conservation, like what Colin Patrick does, the off-leash tracking with these dogs, like in the military, I don't think you would necessarily do that in that particular way, and potentially also not at the speed where it's going, because you walk where the scent is. You don't walk what is tactically best for your team to move through the terrain. So you gotta have that speed and that controlled aggression to keep that pressure on. I think that those are the main differences that I can think of. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I would think so too, that the biggest differences between tracking in combat or law enforcement versus anti-poaching is, it seems like that the combat or law enforcement would be much more, I mean, you have a much larger risk because, I mean, if you make a bad turn or there's a lot more at stake because, I mean, you have yourself, you have your team, everyone that could take fire from an opposition or whatever it may be, or traps, whatever. We're getting into different things, but anti-poaching.
Booby traps is another one. IEDs is another one. That's a reality for military operations, which, aside from a few very select places, we don't have here.
Okay. Well, I guess that's good to hear. The proper tracking on wildlife protection and law enforcement, I mean, how big of an impact is it in those worlds? I mean, is being able to properly track a great skill for every team to have, or is it necessarily, I mean, you mentioned air assets and dogs. Can a lot of guys rely on those rather than having skilled leaders and actual trackers in their group?
Yeah, I mean, it again, there's a bit of nuance. It depends on where you are. If you are around the equator, anywhere in the world, sort of roughly around the equator, that's where the wilderness lends itself really well for tracking. There is exceptions. North America, there's some awesome places where you can track really well, which is far away from the equator. And then there's the snow aspect up in Alaska, Europe, Norway, Finland, Sweden. That's a different game. But if you talk about conservation in sub-Saharan Africa, it is, I think, the most important way to understand what is happening in your protected area. And I think with an aircraft, close second. But tracking is absolutely the most important skill. And the reason why it's not because I love tracking. There might be a little bit of it, but if you imagine the conservation area to be a square, right? And there's two marbles in there. One is a poaching marble and the other is a ranger marble. And they sort of travel around this huge square. The chance of them actually meeting, as in enough proximity with visibility of about 50 meters, that you can actually, make contact with them, is super, super low. But now if you imagine that poacher marble leaves a tail behind it that over time sort of dissipates, and the better you are, the longer the tail is. Now suddenly you have so many more opportunities to cross that, find it, and start following up. And that is something that you will not have without trackers. And like here at Wildlife Works, 500,000 acres, and about 100 people in the field in teams of 6. So you can imagine it's a big old area.
Yeah. That's insane. I couldn't imagine that. I mean, that's a huge landscape, 500,000 acres. What are the challenges whenever you have that large of a landscape that you have to cover from poaching and illegal activities? Like, how does it differ from something that maybe, let's just say 3,000 acres as opposed to 500,000 acres? Is it just sheer amount of we need a larger team? Or, I mean, is there a certain point that you get to where it doesn't matter how large your team is? It's still so much ground to cover.
Yes, you get to that point. Absolutely. But I think I would love to double the range of force here, but that always comes with cost. And a conservation by default is not an industry that is swimming in money, right? So We're always working on every organization is working on trying to get, the funding to run the projects, if you're not talking about government services. So there is a limit to it in the sense of what is actually feasible. But then the biggest challenge for us is really the socioeconomic situation in our surrounding communities. Like, we don't have any fences, so because we connect to a national park, and we connect to one in Tanzania. So it's a big old open space, and we want to keep it like that. But human population is expanding, so we get a lot of people in the communities around. There is not a lot to do here in Tsavo. It's very hard to grow crops. It's very hard, earn a good living so you can put your kids through school. It's all very basic stuff that we all go through. And so that increases the pressure on the park. So a lot of our challenges are in the sense of illegal charcoaling in the park. So people cut down hardwood trees, turn them into charcoal, and either use it or most of the time sell it. There's people that come in to hunt for wildlife, smaller impalas, dig-digs, very cute little antelope that we have here, either for their own protein or again to sell it locally. And it's just an ongoing thing. So snares that are being put out. So that is a matter of, number one, managing it to a manageable level, but also really starting to analyze what causes that particular behavior, right? What are the drivers behind it? And do we have other tools in our toolbox to actually address those challenges so that we don't have to enforce in the park? And that's sort of when your prevention goes really well. We are very lucky at the moment that we don't get the hardcore gangs in here anymore. Okay. When the border between Somalia and Kenya was not closed, but better surveyed because of Al-Shabaab activity in Mozambique, in Somalia, we had less of the sort of the hardcore gangs come in because it was generally, and it's not pointing a finger at a country at all, but it is people with a herder background, mostly from Somalia or that border area. And so, and that was very, very violent. That was AK-47s, PKM, RPG-7, the works, large groups, not very skilled at hunting, so generally would look for a herd of elephants, try to kill as many as they can in a short amount of time, hack out the ivory, and then beeline straight back through Tsavo for hundreds of kilometers back to Somalia. Luckily, we don't have that here at the moment. There's plenty of places that have very, very serious challenges in that sense. But I think where we are fairly lucky that we're not dealing with the high level poaching, the syndicates and stuff.
Yeah. When it gets to that high level of poaching, how skilled do they have to be in order to know that, hey, let's cover our tracks and try to make sure that any of the trackers can't find us? And how do you counter that if you encounter that?
Yeah, we encounter it all the time because, hunters, they obviously know that we have trackers. So they know that they, whatever they can do to avoid, getting caught. Generally how we deal with that is there's a couple that we know of, and I'm happy to give one. If you put foot coverings on, we see it all the time. It doesn't fool the trackers. It just makes your walking really awkward. But there's a ton of other stuff that you can do. And some of it you won't initially notice maybe if it's really effective. So, but at some point you will notice it. And it can either be through that you start seeing it because you are seeing other sign as well, and you wonder, where's the footprint? Where's this? And then you find it. There might actually be people in the community that give you information about how a particular legal hunter works. And then what you need to do is you need to train on it. So you need to replicate that particular anti-tracking technique and replicate it as often, so often that you can recognize it as fast as you would potentially another track, right? And that is just through repetition, sensitization, and that's just doing it, morning, evening, do it during high sun, so the shade is different. Maybe even do it at night, see what you can come up with, and that's sort of how you adapt to that. Yeah.
Okay.
But there's only so many options that you have because humans can't fly. So you have to have contact with the ground at some point. So and you can do all kinds of things to try to make that contact less visible. But ultimately, trackers are able to figure that out. So and then you get that thing where you might use certain movement patterns or procedures that have the potential to slow us down for a bit until we understand what's going on, and then it will stop fooling us on that particular track. So, yeah, that's sort of generally how you try to deal with it. Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned that humans can't fly yet, so let's talk about the future of tracking. We already talked about the modern technology, I mean, whether that be drones in the sky or whatever, they're obviously they're complementing the human aspect of tracking. They're not replacing.
Yes.
Why is the tracking skill at risk of being lost, and how do you keep it alive?
It's not disappearing in Africa. If anything, it's getting bigger.
Good.
So here it is a well recognized skill that can even in some countries be registered so that you can provide evidence in front of a court of law as a expert witness. I think it's called in the US. I think so. It's very much alive. And I won't rule out that at some point there will be a thing where you look with your camera and there's some AI system that recognizes these patterns better than we humans do, and it sort of gives you that predator footprint thingy that you can follow, right? And maybe that day comes, and that is progress. But the other thing with it is that it is a skill that really complements everything else that you want to do when you're working in the bush, and that is a really nice thing. So, and even in the military context, we were tracker trained at the time when we went to Afghan, both times for myself, 2007, 6, 7, to 11, I think, to 10. Because you are sensitized to seeing changes in the natural environment, we were very, very successful in visually identifying IDs. And so, and not just the hidden thing, there was a little bit more to it, maybe not for this podcast, but what happened is we started building enough confidence to not stop at every little dip, not at every little channeling in the road or whatever, to then get the searches out and see if there's anything there. We got to a point where we felt confident, yeah, we can keep moving, So our mobility actually increased massively. And ultimately, this is about observation. Tracking often has this connotation of, here's a guy who puts his ear on the railroad track and, he knows when the train is coming and who did it and what he looks like. That's not the reality of it. It's really just about being a good observer. And I think especially people in the military that spend a lot of time, in the trees, they will have developed some of this already because they are in that environment all the time. They know what it looks like if it's undisturbed. So I don't think it's an old skill. I think it's something that we will keep doing. Whether technology is ever going to replace that, augmented reality glasses that give you an arrow where the track is going. Well, we'll see. Yeah. I don't know.
Lastly, I think we should talk about any advice that listeners or anyone that comes across this podcast or anything, if they want to learn tracking, what's the best way to start developing their own tracking skills? Is it going to a class? Is it going online? Is it all the above? I mean, what do you think?
There's a particular great book out there, and it's written by a former U.S. Border Patrol officer called Jack Kearney. And it's called Tracking, a Blueprint for Learning How. I don't know if it's still in print, but I think on eBay you can find a copy of that. And it's basically a curriculum how to learn how to track. In that particular context, he uses a tracking stick that can help you measure the stride distance so you know where to look for the next track. There's tons of exercises. There's also tons of repetition in there. So it's not for everyone. It is for those people that can find the motivation in repetition and becoming better that way, if that makes sense. Like, he's got exercises in there where he says, okay, we're going to track across dirt. We're going to track when the sun is in front of you. We're going to do it again with the sun behind you. We're going to do it again with the sun to your right. These are the kind of things. So a lot of repetition. But I'm convinced if you follow that book to the T, at the end you know how to track. How a lot of other people like to learn is to find a school, find someone that can teach tracking. It's a great start because it doesn't take a lot to get that flame going. And I would just say that, just like any other sort of unregulated sector, is that there's some good tracking schools out there, and there are some that are not so good. I think that you want to try to find someone who's actually done it, professionally, for instance, or someone that is just very, very good as an amateur. And I don't mean that looking down on them. I have a couple of friends in the Netherlands who are volunteer search and rescue, and they use tracking for that. There are amateurs to some extent, but definitely not unskilled. So yeah, find a good school, get someone that has done it, and then only stay with a school where you can verify what they're telling you. So what I mean by that is if you go out and someone finds a fox print and says, I can see in the track that the fox was, very tired and this, that, and the other. If it can't be confirmed by you, then you are taking someone's word for granted, which means you haven't learned because you're not seeing it, right? So, and I think that is an important one. Those three sort of little rules, and I'm sure and there's a ton of really good instructors in the US as well. People that came from the pedigree of Dave Scott Donnellan. There's some good tracking along the border with Mexico. Some of the indigenous tribes use tracking extensively, and it's still alive to this day. Yeah, there's a ton of good stuff down there.
Awesome. Well, Boris, thank you so much for making time to come onto the show. We covered a lot of topics here. You gave me a lot to actually think about because I knew nothing about tracking or anything like that. So it's great to hear that. And to the audience, thank you guys for tuning in and listening. Be sure to go onto the UF Pro YouTube or wherever you consume this and look out for the next episode. Thanks.
So there you have it. This concludes another episode of UF Pro's Beer 30 podcast. Want more information about UF Pro and tactical clothing for professional end users? Then please visit ufpro.com or follow our channels on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok.